Hello and welcome. I'm so glad to be with all of you tonight. I know that winter has touched us again with his blustery blowing winds and his piles of snow, and I'm sure we're all ready for some springtime. So my name is Leigh-Anne Kehler, and I'm very pleased to be able to present a series of stories for you from the place where I grew up. Twin Pines Farm was near a very tiny village called New Burketown, Manitoba, and that's why I have the village set up behind me. So I wasn't entirely alone. I had a whole community to grow up with, but really my best friends as I was growing up, and also my worst enemies as I was growing up, were my brothers. So I have a series of stories titled The Adventures of Brave Face, Licorice Boy, and Little Leigh. And this is one of those stories. And I'm going to make sure it's a springtime story so that we can get over all this bluster business with winter. When I was small, I was not tall at all. That's why everybody called me Little Leigh. That was my nickname. And I thought, hey, if I have a nickname, my big brother should have nicknames too. So I looked up at my tallest, oldest brother, and he was so slim. I thought he looked like a piece of licorice with arms and legs. So I called him Licorice Boy! And you know what? He didn't mind it. It was his little sister nicknaming him, so he said, that's fine, that's fine. You can call me Licorice Boy, only don't do it in public. Well, then there was the middle brother. He was strong. He was tough. He was my hero. He would always protect me on the school bus. I would sit between them, a sister and a brother sandwich, and he wouldn't let anybody give me any trouble. And when I looked up into his face, I thought, wow, you have such a brave face. Oh, I'm going to call you Brave Face. And so the three of us became Brave Face, Licorice Boy, and Little Leigh. Now, I should warn you, these stories have been stretched into tall stories. I believe that memory lives very close in your brain next to imagination, and you can sprinkle memory with your imagination to grow your stories. It's not lying in my books. It's just a good old-fashioned way of storytelling. So I'm going to tell you one of these stretched tall tales from Twin Pines Farm. Springtime on the farm was always a very exciting time. The barn would be filling up with new animals. And I'll never forget the day. I was in grade 3, and my dad, the farmer slash school bus driver, picked me up from school. And as I leapt onto the bus and jumped up those stairs, my dad said, Little Leigh, there's a surprise for you in the barn. And I said, a surprise in springtime? Oh, I know what that'll be. And as we made our bumpy school bus journey back to New Burketown Village, as we dropped off all the kids, I said, Dad, I know what it'll be. In that barn, the cow had her calf. Moo. And Dad said, good guess, Little Leigh, but that's not it. And we kept going. I said, Dad, I know what it will be. In that barn, there will be more kittens. We already have a lot of cats. We got 33 cats and kittens in total. We don't really need any more, but I guess I could still be surprised by that. I could. Dad said, no more cats, not today. Dad, I know what it is. Maybe the little chicks hatch out of their eggs. They go beep, 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 beep. And when you pick them up, they're so cute and so fuzzy, but sometimes they poop on your hand. Maybe we have little chicks. Dad said, no. Good guess, Little Leigh, but no chicks in the barn today. Those eggs are still round, not ready to hatch. Oh, I know. I didn't know she was expecting, but maybe the horse had a foal. Oh, I'd love a baby horse to play with. Dad said, oh, no foals this spring, Little Leigh. Well, I went through all the animals. Piglets? Nope. Oh, goslings? Nope. Did the dog have some puppies? Nope. Finally, when we got to the farmyard, I realized, Dad, I know what it is. We bought sheep last year. Did the ewe, that's the mama sheep, did the ewe have some lambs? And Dad smiled and he said, maybe. Well, I ran to the barn. I wanted to see my cute, cuddly new lambs. And when I opened the barn door, I saw them there. Twins prancing and dancing around the sheep pen with their proud mama offering them milk. I said, wow, Dad, what a great surprise. Now, he came up just behind me, catching his breath, because it's always hard when you're a big farmer adult trying to run after your little Leigh. And he said, well, this is lovely, but it's not the surprise. The surprise is in the warming box. Now, I should tell you, on many farms, animal farms that is, in the barn, there will be a warming box. And ours was a big crate, used to be an egg crate, pardon me. And there were blankets in there and a heat lamp just over it to keep the animal warm. And that box was reserved just for animals who were born too early or too small. And I always thought, well, I like the runts because they're just like me, because I was also little and small. When I was born, they put me in a shoebox. I didn't even need a crib for the first 2 weeks. Just a shoebox. Can you imagine? Well, I went over to the warming box and I peeked inside and, oh, I saw the tiniest little lamb. He was half the size of his brothers. He could hardly lift his head. He wasn't prancing and dancing. And he looked up at me with his big round eyes, and he said what all little lambs say. He said, meh, meh. You should know that lambs start off saying meh, meh. They only switch over to ba, ba when they turn into grown-up sheep or curly-horned rams. And this little lamb said, meh, meh. And I thought, oh, I'm too young to be your mama. But then Licorice Boy and Brave Face, they came into the barn and they said, hey, yeah, you could be the mama, because you know that that mother sheep, she wasn't going to give any milk to Runty. Oh, that's what I called him. Runty is a good name for him because he was the smallest lamb I'd ever seen. Well, how are we going to get milk into that lamb, thought Brave Face. And those boys were always coming up with ideas. So Licorice Boy, he ran back to the farmhouse with his long licoricey legs. And then he came running back to the barn with his long licoricey legs. And he handed me my own baby bottle. Oh, but we can't milk the ewe. That will never do. And they said, well, we could milk the cow into the bottle. Moo. Well, that's just what we did. We put the bottle under the cow and moo, moo, moo. You can do that too at home. Moo, moo, moo. And then I put the lid on the baby bottle and I went over to the lamb and I picked her up and I stuck that bottle in his mouth. Dunk. Yeah, it was a he, not a she. I should say that. It was a he lamb. Dunk. And he just was drinking and drinking. He was so hungry. And soon he wasn't drinking milk anymore. He was just sucking air. I said, hey, stop sucking air. It's going to give you the burps. And I pulled out that bottle. For such a tiny body, he had the biggest belch of them all. I was very proud, Mama, that my baby could make a belch like that. And I put him back into the warming box. And I covered him up with a blanket. And I thought, well, that's it. Now he's fed for the day. I didn't know much about newborns back then. Now I am a mother and I know they like to eat a lot. Well, it was just after dinner time and I was sitting down to play a board game with my brothers because we didn't have a TV. We didn't have an internet. Can you imagine? How did we survive? And as I sat there playing the Monopoly and losing quite badly, we all heard it. Meh. And the boy said, yeah, your baby's calling. Go ahead, little Lee. Go feed your lamb. Well, I had to go back to the barn. It was dark outside and milk the cow, moo, and feed the lamb. And then put it back into the box. And I thought, well, that's got to be it. That's surely the end of it. But as I was brushing my teeth for bed and I had my nice warm strawberry shortcake pajamas on and I was ready to dive under my strawberry shortcake blanket by the light of my strawberry shortcake nightlight, he called me again. Meh! Oh, I had to go to the barn in my pajamas and milk the cow and feed the lamb. This was too much work. Well, by the time I got back to the farmhouse, I was so tired. My head hit the pillow and I was off into dreamland. In the middle of the night, by the light of the full moon, my lamb became hungry again. I'm guessing that he opened his big round eyes in the darkness, and his belly was growling at him, and he called out in a loud voice now because the cow's milk had given him some strength. Meh, 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 meh. Well, it was so loud, it woke up all the other animals in the barn, and the pigs were squealing, and the cows were mooing, and the horses were neighing, and the geese were honking, honking, honking. Even the rooster got confused. He thought it was morning. And those boys, Licorice Boy and Braveface, they were sleeping on the other side of the wall in their own room, and they kicked the wall with their feet, and they said, "Get up and feed your baby. None of us can sleep." So in the middle of the night, I had to put on my boots and go to the barn and milk the cow and feed my lamb. I was so tired. My father would often find me lying asleep on a hay bale in the morning. This I did for 3 weeks. I fed him in the morning, right after school, after dinner, before bed, and in the middle of the night. I was very sleepy at school. I would often fall asleep in Miss Camden's grade 3 class, and she'd say, "Little Leigh, little Leigh, little Leigh, what's the answer?" "Mommy!" "Oh, what? Where am I?" But after 3 weeks, I got a big surprise. I went to the barn, and Runty had bust out of the box, and he was standing there on the hay bale. And he was looking at me like, "I'm all grown up now." And I thought, hey, it's time to put you back in the sheep pen. So I went over to the sheep pen, and his brothers were prancing and playing, but his mother was sleeping in the corner. And I put him in the sheep pen, and he didn't prance and play with his brothers. He went over to the corner where the ewe was sleeping, and he stood on her as if to say, "I grew up with no help from you." That's when I got an idea. I picked up Runty, and I went over to Betsy the cow. Now, I should tell you, it's I Love to Read month, and I want to share with you that when I was little, one of my favorite places to read was on top of Betsy's back. I could lie on her back all afternoon with a good book, and she'd hardly move. She'd just wander around, chewing the grass and chewing her cud. So I put Runty on Betsy's back, and he just settled down in there, and I thought, this is a perfect picture opportunity. So I went to the farmhouse, and Braveface came because he was better at photography and older than me, and click. Oh, we had to wait 2 weeks to see that picture because there was no instant picture taking back then, no digital, nothing like that. We had to develop the film. And when we finally went to go pick up the film, I thought it was such a good picture, I sent it into the newspaper. And you know, the Red River Valley Echo put that picture on the front page. And the title was, "Not a Cowboy, a Cow Lamb." And soon, people were coming from miles around to see the lamb that could ride the cow. Oh, it's like I'm in the middle of my very own Charlotte's Web, only it's Little Leigh's lamb. And you should read that book, Charlotte's Web, if you haven't read it. It's a perfect book to read for I Love to Read month anyway. Well, I got the idea that I was going to charge some money. And I put out my hand and I said, 50 cents, please. And you know what? They all paid up. And they took lots of pictures of Runty, and I thought he was showing off, you know, trying to be a superstar lamb. My man. But soon the novelty wore off, and the people stopped coming. Still, I had lots of money, so I put some in the bank, and I bought lots of chocolate bars, especially Mars bar, because I love it so much. And that's not a plug or anything; it's just what I love. And I bought a big round red bow for Runty, and he wore it all summer long. But at the end of summer, I was very sad because Dad was rounding up all the male lambs. We had a few others. We were going to sell them. Dad said, "We can only have one ram on a farm. More than one makes trouble." And I said, "But Dad, you can't sell my Runty." And all the other lambs had switched from meh to baba. But Runty was still going meh. He still calls me his mama. He doesn't want to go away from me. So Dad thought about it, and he said, "All right, little Leigh, we'll give Runty his very own pen." And you know, he grew up in that pen. And it was a bit of a miracle. Even when he was a thick, wide, curly-haired ram with round, curly horns and a big beard hanging off of his chin. Somehow he still enjoyed wearing that bow. We had to sew it a little bit to make it bigger for his thick neck, but he still enjoyed wearing it. And even when he was all grown up, he still insisted on saying meh, especially when he saw me coming his way. Now, that Runty ram is not with me anymore, but I will still always keep the memory, and I think memories make for great stories. Now, I have a story to share with you that's not a farm story. I want to shake things up a little bit, and it's a video that was filmed with my husband, Randy Guest. And it's a video that is about winter. So I know that it's winter outside and everything, but I think it would be nice to say goodbye to winter with a story about it. It's one of my favorite stories called The Needlemaker's Daughter. I'm hoping that it will play, and if not, we'll just go back to live storytelling. Here we go. Let's see if it will play. Again, this is sort of like our own kind of genre. We shoot story movies together where the storyteller is telling, and then we have different visuals to support the story. This first story is from the public domain, which basically means it comes from long, long ago. Now, it's a fairy tale about Grandfather Frost. I'm sure you've heard of Jack Frost, but this is Jack's grandpapa, and he's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They say he rides on the north wind. His hair is made of icicles, and he has long, icy fingers. On his face, because he's ancient, you would see wrinkles. On his wrinkles. On his wrinkles. But the story doesn't begin with Grandfather Frost. The story begins with Needlemaker and his daughter. Now, they lived deep in the woods in a tiny cottage, and it was a convenient place for them to live, for you see, at this time, people were still sewing their own clothes. But of course, if you want to sew, you need needle and thread. Well, the forest provided tiny twigs from the branches, and together, the daughter and her father would whittle them until they were sharp and pointy enough to cut through the material. Then they would poke tiny holes in the needle to make room for the thread. When they had enough needles, they would pile them high, in summertime in the back of the wagon, and in wintertime in the back of the sleigh. Then off to market they would go with their horse. Trot, 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 trot. Now, Needlemaker's daughter was getting older, and although the story doesn't tell us her name, we all know that when you're getting older, sometimes you just don't want to do what your parents are doing. Sometimes you just want to go it on your own. So, one cold winter's day, as the sleigh was piled high with needles ready to go to market, the father looked at his daughter and he asked, "Oh, my girl, do you really want to go to market with me?" "Honestly, father, not so much." Then he gave her an offer. "Why don't you stay at home in our tiny cottage? I know you can look out for yourself." "Oh, yes, I can," she said. "I know just what to do. I have a few dried berries left over from the summertime, and I have some vegetables from our garden still left behind, and if I get really hungry, I can always snare a rabbit and make rabbit stew. And to entertain myself, I can sing with the birds, la 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 la, or I can dance with the deer." "Oh, yes, father, let me be alone. Let me prove that I can manage it all by myself." Well, no sooner had she said this than her father leapt up into the sleigh and guided the horses, and they all trotted away. Well, at first it was very exciting. She cleaned the cottage from top to bottom. Then she bundled up and went outside and enjoyed some scampering squirrels in nearby trees. But as the days and nights went by, she began to worry about her father. Usually a trip to the market would take at most 2 days and 2 nights. But a whole week, and then 10 days, and then 14 days had gone by, and still he'd not arrived at home. She began to worry and wonder, what if he's been eaten by a pack of wild wolves? The very next morning, much to her relief, Needlemaker's daughter heard the familiar ringing of sleigh bells. And she knew Father's home. She ran to the window of their tiny cottage and breathed her hot breath on the ice that had gathered there overnight. She looked out, and she saw that her father had arrived with the sleigh and the horses, and sitting beside him, there was a woman. And sitting in the back of the sleigh, there was a girl, possibly her age. Well, she was so excited. She threw on her warm coat, and she headed outside.
She ran to the sleigh, and she looked up at the woman, and she said, "Let me introduce myself. I know who you are," answered the woman. And then Needlemaker's daughter noticed that she had a very blue tinge to the skin on her face, not unlike the people of the north that she had heard about in stories. "I'll tell you who I am. I am your new stepmother, and you will do whatever I say." And the girl at the back cried out as well, "Yes, I'm your new stepsister, and you will do whatever I say." Now, I don't know the new stepsister's name, but I can tell you this. If I were to give her a name, I'd call her Sour-Faced Girl. Oh, she looked like she'd been sucking on lemons all her life. And I can tell you how that happens to a person. It's when you think only thoughts of yourself that your face begins to change. Me, 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 me. Perhaps she was born quite beautiful, but now she had the face of selfishness. Once inside the cottage, there was no end to the demands of the new stepmother and the new stepsister. "Brush my hair, make me a new dress. Oh, I'm hungry, give me something to eat. Polish my shoes, clean this cottage. I won't walk on a floor that's so dirty. And the worst of all, clip my toenails." Now, I don't know about you, but if this was my life, I'd get pretty miserable. Well, Needlemaker's daughter, she decided to make the best of it. So even though they made great demands of her, every day, morning, noon, and night, she would sing along with the birds who were always gathering outside the window, even in the coldest days of winter. La 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 la, as she swept the floor. La 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 la, as she washed the dishes. La 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 la, as she brushed her stepsister's hair. And because she chose to be happy no matter her circumstances, she grew more and more beautiful. And the stepmother grew more and more jealous. She began to plot. I need a plan, a way of getting rid of her. And on one of winter's coldest, iciest days, that stepmother woke with a smile. "Oh, I'm hungry for strawberries." Then she looked down at her new stepdaughter, the Needlemaker's daughter, and she said, "You will take this empty basket, go into the woods, and find me some strawberries." "I'd love to do that, yes, but strawberries only grow in the summertime. I suppose we'll have to wait." "I don't want to wait. But don't worry, child. I have made a warm coat and hat and boots for you. I made them out of my love for you." Then she went to the closet, and she took out a coat made of paper, a hat made of paper, and boots made of paper. Oh, Needlemaker's daughter didn't want to be ungrateful, so she took them, and she put them on, and she took the empty basket, and she headed out into the cold, wintry forest. As Needlemaker's daughter made her way through the woods, she felt the cold winds whipping through the paper coat. She knew that she would have to have the warmest thoughts to keep herself from freezing to death that day. So she closed her eyes, and she imagined swimming in a warm river in the hot sun, jumping in the water with the fish, butterflies flitting on the wind, deer dancing past. And as she was thinking these thoughts, she warmed so greatly from the inside out that every step she took melted the snow beneath her feet. But still the trouble of the strawberries. Where to find them? She sat under the protection of a pine tree, and as she sat there, thinking of where strawberries might grow in the wintertime, Grandfather Frost flew by. Well, Grandfather Frost landed at the top of this pine tree, and he called out to Needlemaker's daughter, "Child, are you warm?" She could not see him, but she could hear him, so she answered, "Yes, I have my warm thoughts to keep me so. I am quite warm, whoever you are." Then he leapt from branch to branch, shaking the snow off the tree as he made his way closer and closer to Needlemaker's daughter. In the middle of the tree he called out, "Child, are you toasty?" And she answered him, "Yes, I am quite toasty all the way down to my toesies, whoever you are." Finally, he leapt from branch to branch until he could jump out in front of her. And he cried out, "Child, are you happy?" And she answered him, "Yes, I am quite happy. I have a safe home and a warm place to live and food for my belly, but what would truly make me happier is if I could find strawberries that grow in winter's snow." Well, Grandfather Frost could see that this girl was truly filled with a warmth coming from her joyful heart. So he lifted an icy finger and he pointed at the snow. And right then and there, strawberries began to grow, first with long green vines, then tiny white flowers, followed by tiny green strawberries, and finally, fresh, ripe, red strawberries, ready for the picking and the plucking. Well, no sooner had Needlemaker's daughter filled her basket than Grandfather Frost had disappeared, jumping up on a cold gust of wind. Well, she ran back to the cottage, so excitedly, ready to share her sweet surprise with her new family. Needlemaker threw open the door so excitedly. "Look what I've brought you! Strawberries! Winter strawberries!" But she had no time to explain that Grandfather Frost had helped her to find them, for you see, the stepmother grabbed the basket and she gobbled up those strawberries. She left only one tiny green one. "Here, you take it. I've no use for it." But because Needlemaker's daughter had patience, she knew that if she took the green strawberry and put it in her pocket, maybe in a few days it would be ripe and ready to eat. The following morning, stepmother was again hungry for strawberries. But this time she turned to her own daughter, the stepsister, and she said, You will go into the woods and bring back strawberries today." "Me? Not me. I just want to sit here waiting for the prince." But it was no use. The stepmother bundled up her own daughter, not in paper, but in warm clothes. After all, she was her own flesh and blood, gave her the empty basket, and booted her out the door. As the sour-faced stepsister made her way through the icy winds and the wintry cold, she didn't have a single warm thought to keep her company. "I'm so cold! I need a prince to rescue me!" Then she sat down under the shelter of that same pine tree. Well, you might know who happened to come by. Riding on the north wind, oh yes, it was him, Grandfather Frost, with his wrinkles and his icy hair and his long icy fingers. And as he landed on the top of the tree, he cried out, "Child, are you warm?" And though she could not see him, she could hear him. And sour-faced stepsister cried out, "Of course I'm not warm, whoever you are. I'm sitting in the snow under a tree in the middle of the woods." Well, he leapt from branch to branch, growing ever closer to sour-faced girl. And then he cried out, "Child, are you toasty?" And she answered him, "Of course I'm not toasty. What do you think I am, a piece of bread?" Well, he leapt from branch to branch until finally he jumped out in front of her and he asked that question, "Child, are you happy?" "Of course I'm not happy. Look at me. I'm so cold. I'm frozen." And you know what? She truly was frozen through and through. For Grandfather Frost knew what to do. He simply breathed his icy breath, and she became an ice statue. Then he leapt up on the wind and flew away. And so the story might have ended that day, but for a very brave stepsister, Needlemaker's daughter, back at the cottage. When the sun began to go low, she put on her warmer clothes, and she went out into the woods searching for her lost sister. And when she came upon her, frozen as ice, it
was as if something in her heart told her what to do. She reached into the pocket and found that strawberry, and it had ripened there. And when she placed it on her sister's tongue, her sister began to thaw with the warmth of not just the strawberry, but the love that it took to give it to her. Oh, thank you! Thank you, she cried! And for the first time in a long time, her face was not sour, and the two of them embraced, and they skipped through the woods back to the cottage, sisters, hand in hand.
When the two of them arrived home, they could see that stepmother had truly been worrying about them. I suppose a little bit of the ice around her own heart had melted away. And she said, "Girls! Girls, you're home!" And she wrapped her arms around them. And I must say that from that moment on, they all became quite a happy family. And together they lived in that tiny cottage in the woods. And there was no need of a prince to come and rescue those girls, for they grew up happily as sisters. And one might even say that they lived happily ever after.
I hope you enjoyed that story. I certainly enjoyed telling it and making the story movie with Randy Guest. If you'd like to see some more stay-at-home content, he has quite a lot of videos available on his website, Randy Guest, Guest, Two's a Crowd Productions, TOOZ, A Crowd Productions. I just wanted to share this photo with you before I tell you the story attached to it, so you can see that it is springtime. Even though there's snow on the ground, there's just a very thin layer of snow on the ground, and that means that the big blustery snowbanks, and I should say the big blustery wind that makes the big snowbanks that pile around the barns and the houses, that's all over with. We would usually have snow piled right up to the roof of the barn. Well, this dinosaur was made by Licorice Boy. He was very talented. But of course, I was as mischievous as he was talented. So in springtime, I actually crawled into that mouth right there. And I decided that I would just sit in that mouth to read my book. I was always dragging books all over the farmyard. But because it was spring and because that dinosaur was already starting to melt, as I sat there, suddenly the mouth closed and I was stuck inside the dinosaur. I was really terrified for my life, to be honest with you. And I cried out, "Help! Help! Somebody help!" And I was afraid that I was going to run out of oxygen. Well, Braveface and Licorice Boy, who were always my heroes, they came running and they dug me out just in time. And I remember, catching my breath. I'm sure my face was just as blue as the face of the stepmother in that previous story. So really, they were my caregivers. They constantly had to look out for me because a farm is an exciting place to grow up, but sometimes it can be a little bit dangerous. And sometimes big brothers, they don't quite follow through on their caregiver responsibilities. And this is a story about that. So we're still in springtime, and I should tell you that sometimes when we had really high snow drifts, I think I had a picture here of there we go, a really high snowdrift. That is my grandpa, and my dad is standing on a snowdrift that has actually covered the barn one year. So we don't really get snowstorms like that anymore due to global warming, but it's incredible that how much has changed, right? And we're talking about having a drought in southern Manitoba this year because of the very little bit of snow that has fallen. Well, certainly there wasn't a little bit of snow back then. Well, some years when we had all of that snow and it would melt really quickly, like in a day or two, we would have almost like a lake behind our barn, and that lake would spread around to other farms. And I'll never forget the spring when, being inventive as he was, Licorice Boy decided that we should build a raft. Well, we had some planks left over from a barn that had fallen down because on a farm, when something falls down, you leave the wood around just in case you need it. You're always building stuff on a farm. And the boys, they spread the wood planks out on the grass, and they took my dad's hammer and his old rusty nails, and they made a raft. Oh, I'm so excited. I can hardly wait. But I was also just a little bit nervous on the inside because that was a really big lake, and I didn't want to drown in there. Well, the boys picked up the raft. 1, 2, 3, splash! It landed in the water, and it floated for about 3 seconds, and then it sank. But, when you're farm kids and you don't have a TV to distract you or a Nintendo Switch, you just want to find solutions to your problems and keep playing outside. Oh, we were outside all the time. I think we were only inside for when we were sleeping. Well, brave face, he was thinking about it, and then he got an idea. He always got this idea look on his face. And I'd say, what do we do? What do we do? And he always answered the same way. You'll see. Oh, you'll see. Why don't you just tell me? Well, he went to the shed, and he brought out a rubber dinghy that we used sometimes when we were out camping. Now, of course, we couldn't use the rubber dinghy in that water because it had just been snow and it was very, very cold. But he blew it up, and then he attached it with really strong hay bale twine. Nothing can defeat the hay bale twine. It's so strong, it's really fine. He wrapped it around and he attached it to the bottom of the raft. Now, 1, 2, 3, splash! It floated, and it did not sink. Well, Licorice Boy said, I'll be the first one to try it out. I don't weigh much more than a piece of licorice, according to our little sister. So he stretched out with one long leg and plunk, and another long leg and plunk, and he was standing there. And then Brave Face said, oh, well, now it's little sister's turn. Me? No, not me, no! But I never had a choice in the matter. He just picked me up and he placed me there beside Licorice Boy. And I held on to him for dear life, which wasn't much to hold on to. And then Brave Face said, "Arr, matey, I be jumping aboard! No, jumping!" And he came running. It felt like a ramped up slow-mo. And he leapt into the air and he landed on the raft with a mighty bam. Oh, it went up and down and up and down. And then I looked at Licorice Boy and I noticed his jacket was hanging off of him because he was so slim. And I said, hey, your jacket's the flag and you're the flagpole. And now we really are a pirate ship. Arr! But those boys, they were never satisfied until I would start to scream. So that was their favorite thing to do, was freak out their little sister, protect her and freak her out, polar opposites. And they went to one side of the raft, and their weight brought the raft down. And I was trying to hold the other side down, but it went whoop, up into the air. And I said, no, in a really high pitch. Now, of course, the dogs all went, "Ow, ow, ow," and answered me. But my mother inside the house, she heard. Mothers have really strong ears. And she threw on her boots and she threw on her jacket. And then we saw her marching down to the lake behind our barn that I had nicknamed Muddy Field Lake, because underneath that water there was mud, icky, sticky mud, ookie, yucky mud. It would pull the boot right off your foot. Well, Mother, she stopped all of a sudden. She went into the shed, and I thought, is she going to get another rubber dinghy? What's she doing in there? Now, she came out with Brave Face's hockey stick, and she was just smacking it in her hand. And I thought, uh-oh, I think our bottoms are in trouble. And when she got down to Muddy Field Lake, she said, boys, do you know that the water along the shoreline is just fine? It's not that deep. But the water in the middle could be over little Lee's head. Well, we didn't think of that, Mom. She said, well, that's why I'm here, to do the thinking for you. When you have teenagers, as a mother, you have to do a lot of thinking for them. And she said, now, I couldn't find any life jackets in the shed. It's been a long time since we've gone camping or canoeing with life jackets. So I need you to promise that you will not go to the middle of the lake, that you will stay along the edges. Well, sure, Mom, we promise, of course. Then she handed the hockey stick to Brave Face, and she smiled, and she said, you're going to need a paddle. Well, he took the hockey stick and he said, thanks, Mom. I just thought I was going to have to use a Licorice Boy as a paddle. The mom turned around and she went back to the house, trusting those boys with my care. Now, it was a great adventure. It felt like we were in Egyptian times long ago, when the people had rafts and long bamboo poles. And we couldn't really paddle with the hockey stick. It just made us go round and round and round in circles. So Brave Face, he figured it out. He put the hockey stick down into the mud. And then he pulled it out. And he did this so we could make our way. And we were going all the way around. We waved at the other farm kids. It was a great adventure. And I even found some treasure. I pulled an old rubber tire out of the water, and it made the perfect seat for a pirate queen. Ah, matey, I'd be your queen. And we came back home just in time. Mom was honking the car horn. We didn't have a dinner bell, but she would honk the car horn because it was such a big farmyard, and that meant come inside, dinner's ready. Now, we were telling Mom and Dad stories of the adventure that we had out on the lake, and I wish I could tell you, pardon me, that the story ends there. But it doesn't. The very next day, we went back down to the lake, and the boys got that look in their eye, which meant they were about to dare me. And I didn't even have to hear the dare. I said, "You're not supposed to dare me. It's against the family rules." And they said, "Oh, come on, little Leigh. We just want to see if you can stand on the raft all by yourself." "Well, I don't want to stand on the raft all by myself." "What's the matter? Are you chicken?" "I am not a chicken. I don't live in a coop. I don't have feathers. I don't lay eggs. And when you pick me up, I do not poop in your hand. I will stand on the raft all by myself." Now, the boys were being careful. They held on to the raft, and I jumped aboard. 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4, 3. I jumped. And I felt like I was leaping through the air, only it was probably just a little boink, little jump. And as I landed there, I thought, this is great. The queen of the pirates, she has boarded the ship. But sometimes the wind in spring can be a very tricky thing. It can be very still, and then all of a sudden, it picks up. And on this day, when the wind picked up, it began to blow very hard, very suddenly. And the boys cried out, little Leigh, jump to shore. We can't hold on anymore. I can't jump to shore. I'm frozen with fear." The boys let go, and the raft began to drift out to the middle of Muddyfield Lake. I could hardly open my eyes. I was truly frozen with fear, and I knew it was time to sound the alarm. Every child who is the youngest child in a family, and especially if they have older brothers, is born with a siren deep in their belly to be used on only the most dangerous of occasions. And this was really a dangerous occasion. So I reached down into my belly with all my breath, and I called out, "Mommy!" She was inside the house with the door locked and the window shut, but she heard me. A mother always hears that siren. She said, what's wrong with little Leigh?" She threw on her boots, she threw on her coat, and she ran down to Muddyfield Lake. Mommy. Now, I don't know what she said to the boys. They were too far away, but it did look like this. She looked up at her teenage boys and she said, something like that. Well, suddenly those boys were walking through the water, and there was that mud, icky, sticky, ooky mud, and it was trying to pull the boots right off their feet, and they were struggling against it. And suddenly, my tears, because of course I'd been crying my eyes out and putting them back in again to use for later, my tears began to dry up. When those boys got to the raft, I said, "You better get me back to shore. I'm frozen." And they said, "What do you think we are?" Frozen too. And as they pushed me back to shore, suddenly, Braveface called out, "No, lost my boot!" But there was no time to look for it. They were supposed to rescue me. And when we got to shore, I'll never forget, he came out with one rubber boot, and then he dragged his sock foot out, and it was loaded with mud. It looked like the foot of a mud monster. And then he peeled that sock off his foot and he held it up, and we thought, wow, we should put that in the museum. Mud monster foot in the museum. And Mom said, "As long as you don't let it near my washing machine." Now, I should tell you, that was probably one of our greatest adventures. And when the water sort of ran off to the rivers and the field began to dry up, there was Braveface's boot just sticking up out of the ground. And our dad was about to take out the harrow, which means he's going to turn the soil over and prepare it for seeds. And Braveface said, "Wait, Dad, I got to go get my boot." And Dad said, "No, we're going to leave it out there as a reminder to you kids of how important it is to always look after each other." Now, I don't know how long that boot was out there, but in my mind, it was there for many, many years. And every time we would ride by on our bicycles, I'd say, "There's the boot. Remember to look out for me." And eventually, I'm guessing that the sun turned the boot from black to green to white and bleached it out. And mice probably lived in it and chewed some holes in it. And eventually, my dad did just turn it back into the soil. Even though the boot is gone, I'll always have this memory. And as I said before, memories make for really great stories. And speaking of a memory, here's a memory of my dad on the homestead wearing his father's big boots. Those are some pretty big boots to fill. Yeah. Now, I just want to quickly tell you a story from fall. I was going to show you first. Here's a picture of my family when we were enjoying the new Berchtel Centennial, 100 years. I'm about 4 years old there, just grinning. And my mom and dad and I are dressed up like pioneers. And it was a really special day for me. And I still have that dress. And here's a picture of my dad with the chickens. And the chickens back in his day would just wander around the farmyard. We kept ours in a pen, but I guess initially they just wander around the farmyard. And there he is with my grandpa. And my dad told me a story one time about the turkey that would never be caught for Thanksgiving dinner. And every time he tried to catch it, and I'm going to just say, tried to off with the head with the axe, the turkey would turn around and go, "Gobble, gobble, 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 gobble." And I'll never forget, he said, even when they put it, even when its head was gone, the head was still saying, "Gobble, gobble, 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 gobble." Even when they pulled out its insides, the turkey was still moving around and going, "Gobble, gobble, gobble." Even when they put it in the oven and turned up the heat, they could hear it, "Gobble, gobble, gobble." This was a turkey of legend. But the greatest part of the story is they were so tired from dealing with this runaround turkey, they went and sat down and took a little break from it. And nobody heard the oven door open. At least that's what they said. At least that's the way my father told the story. And they went back to the kitchen and it was open. And the pan had only carrots and potatoes and some celery in there. And there was no turkey, but they could see the tracks that its claws had left across the floor. And when my dad went back out to the fence to see, it was standing there as proud as could be. Insides back inside, head on its neck, plucked feathers back in place. And he looked at my dad and he said, "Gobble, gobble, gobble." And my dad just scratched his head and he said, "Yeah, gobble, gobble, gobble. The joke's on me." And I think they had a vegetarian Thanksgiving that fall. No turkey to help them out at all. Now, I do want to head back and do my last story in wintertime. So to track us back to wintertime, I have a very short story that I created again with Randy Guest, the filmmaker. This one's only about 2 minutes long, and I wrote it for you. And I think it's going to help you for I Love to Read Month, which is almost over, which I think is I Love Stories Month, I Love to Write Month. It's anything to do with stories. Maybe this story will help you think about writing your own story. It's about a snowflake, and snowflakes have a pretty incredible journey to make when they journey from the sky to the earth below. I saw a lot of them journeying today. They have a lot of potential stories to tell, so here's one of them. Enjoy.
I was thinking about snowflakes the other day and imagining a story that I might tell you. A snowflake came fluttering down from the sky, and as it was floating through the air, a nearby fire called out to it, "Snowflake, snowflake, land on me." Of course, the fire was intending to melt that snowflake. Well, the snowflake was tempted, and the snowflake did land in the fire. "Ha ha," said the fire. "Now I've got you." But what the fire didn't understand is that wherever that snowflake would land, something brand new would happen. And the snowflake as it melted away in the flames, giggled at the fire. The joke's on you. For you see, when I land on a tree, I bring giggles to that tree. And when I land on the tongue of a child, there's a magical moment, for nothing is quite so crisp and clean as the taste of snow on your tongue. And when I land on the nose of a puppy dog, well, that puppy dog skips and prances away, his heart filled with joy. And now that I've landed on you, I think I shall turn into a beautiful spark. And that snowflake was transformed. And as she had come down from the sky, now she flew back up toward it, a spark in the crisp, fresh winter air.
So yeah, you can think about it, maybe sit around with your family and create your own snowflake story. I was also going to just mention that although the pandemic has been tough on us, and even though some of the restrictions are being loosened up now, spending so much time at home is a great way to review your memories and the things you've done together, and just grow those stories by sprinkling them with a bit of imagination, and create your own set of family stories. This is the final one. You have to excuse me today. I'm battling a bit of a cold. It takes place in wintertime, and it's the great snow storm. It had snowed not for 1 day, not for 2 days, not for 3 days, but 4 whole days. And in the old farmhouse, the electricity went out, which is very scary when you're living in an old farmhouse, because we were too far away to call for help if anything should happen. We had to go down into the basement, and we sat around the old wooden stove, and we cooked on the wooden stove, and we played board games by the light of the stove, and we listened to the radio announcer. Good thing we had lots of batteries. And he said, snow's still falling, storm still blowing, snow still falling, storm still blowing. But on the 4th morning, he said, storm's over, time to dig out. Well, I was so excited. I ran up the stairs and, what? The snow had piled past the windows of our house. I couldn't believe it. We're stuck in here like mole people. Then I thought, I'm going to open the door and get out of here. I was getting a little claustrophobia. And I ran to the door, and I remember my family calling out, almost like in slow-mo, no. And when I got to the door, I opened it, and it was an avalanche of snow pushing me back against the kitchen cupboards. Oh no, what have I done? And Dad said, well, kids, we're going to have to dig out. Wow, we really are mole people. And Mom said, if you're going to dig out, then you have to put on your outside clothes. Even though you're inside, eventually you'll be outside. Oh no, outside clothes. That meant the red snowsuit. I hated the red snowsuit. It had been passed down from Licorice Boy to Brave Face and then me. It had patches on the elbows and patches on the knees and patches on the butt. I hated that thing. And whenever I put it on, my mother always asked me 5 questions. Little Leigh, do you have to go pee? No, Mother, don't embarrass me. Little Leigh, do you have to go pee-pee? No, I don't have to go 1 pee, 2 pees, or 3 pees, even 4 pees. Stop asking. Little Leigh, should you skip to the loo? Why should I skip to loo? I don't even know him, and you say not to talk to strangers. Little Leigh, should you visit the toilet? I don't visit the toilet. Hello, toilet, what you doing? That's just weird. Little Leigh, do you have to? No, Mama, no, I don't have to go. Well, I could understand why she asked those questions. It took a long time getting into that snowsuit, and we'd zip up that rusty old zipper, and it always got stuck in my neck. And then she'd put the toque down over my eyebrows, and the hood went over, and the scarf went round and round and round and round and round and round. My grandmother had knitted that scarf. It could reach across any household or classroom. It was that long, and I'd always call it, I can't breathe, and Mom would say, good, you'll be warm. And I always had a trick. I'd put my mitts on first, and then I'd say, uh-oh, somebody has to put on my boots. I already have my mitts on. My kindergarten teacher didn't like that one so much. Well, finally, I had my red snowsuit on, and we started to dig. Look at this. We really are mole people. Dig. First, we went out of the house, And then dig, we dug up until we broke through the surface of the snowstorm snow. Whoa. I have to tell you, I have seen a lot of beautiful sights in my life. I've traveled through jungles and I've been to the top of Mount Fuji. Storytellers do a lot of adventuring to gather up their stories. But this one sticks in my mind as possibly one of the most beautiful. The snow was sparkling like fresh diamonds all around, and hanging from the trees as though the trees had been transformed into some sort of northern creature. I just wanted to stare at it forever, but the boys were already making a plan. They were digging down to the ground. And I should tell you, because the wind had been blowing so hard, the top surface of the snow was crusty and thick, and we didn't break through, so there was no worry about losing one of us. Well, the boys, they hauled out the toboggan. They had figured out where we'd left it behind before the snowstorm. And those boys took that toboggan to the top of the roof of the house. The snow was that high, it had reached the roof, just like that picture that I showed you from my dad standing on the snow by the barn long ago. And I said, "We're going to toboggan off the roof of the house? No way!" And brave face, he said, "Yes way." And he potato sacked me, which meant I had no choice. And he carried me down to the toboggan. I should say he carried me up to the toboggan. Licorice Boy, he was at the front, ready to steer. And I was placed in the middle, sister and a brother sandwich. And Brave Face was going to give the push. 1, 2, 3, go! And then he leapt in the air and he landed on the back of that toboggan. Well, we took off like a shot. Down from the roof of the house, across the farmyard, bye-bye chicken, bye-bye cow, out into the open field. We even passed a guy on a snowmobile. Hey, what are those kids driving? I gotta get me one of those. And if you had been there that day, you would have heard me calling out over the harsh, cold winter winds, "I have to go pee!" When we finally stopped, the house was so far away, it looked like something ants would live in. Oh no, and I've gotta go. Well, the boys knew. The little sister who has to go, now that is an emergency. So Brave Face picked me up and he put me on his shoulders and he started running across the snow. And I said, "You better run or I'm gonna turn you into a popsicle." Well, then he took me off his shoulders, smart boy, put me on the toboggan. And they were pulling me back to the house. Not so bumpy. Not so bumpy. I really gotta go, and bumpy's not good. Could you go just kind of slow? Well, when we got back to the house, the boys called down from the top of the tunnel, "Mom, open the door. We're sending down little Leigh, and she's gotta go pee." So Mom opened the door, and they sent me flying down the tunnel. Whee! Boom, boom, boom. I landed in the kitchen. Well, off went the hood. Bye-bye toque. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Bye-bye scarf. Zip went the zipper. Kicked off the boots. Bye-bye mittens. And oh, I don't have to go. False alarm. Well, those boys, they were a little mad at me at first. But then Mom had hot chocolate with those little mini marshmallows, and she pulled some chocolate chip cookies out of the oven. And as we sat there dipping the cookies in our hot chocolate, we all agreed that that was the best adventure we'd ever had. And I do think it makes one of my better stories from Twin Pines Farm near New Burketown, Manitoba in the year 1977, long time ago. Thank you for joining me. I have a little goodbye video for you. And once again, I just want to encourage you to sit down with your families and use this pandemic time to stir up your memories and discover your stories. Bye, everyone. I'm just going to show you a video. There's a few pictures of that snowsuit in wintertime. It's kind of fun. And pictures of me when I was a little one. Bye-bye.